If you have ever felt your heart burst when you finally found a child you thought was lost forever, or felt it tighten when your child suddenly vanished without a single word, then stay with this story. Diep and James are living through moments like that right now. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow what happens next. The house remains submerged in tension, with no sign of easing. James and Mrs. Huen took turns calling Mr. Hone, again and again. Every call ended the same way, with the same emotionless response. The number you have dialed is currently unavailable. The sound repeated so many times that it weighed heavily on the heart, as if every second were being stretched out with cruel slowness. No one knew what to do next. Call the police or wait a little longer? Each choice felt equally heavy. Waiting risked being too late, but reporting it risked making everything worse, if this was only a misunderstanding. Mrs. Huen sat in silence, her hands tightly clasped together, her eyes never leaving the door. James leaned against the wall, his mind in turmoil, waves of helplessness rising one after another. Time passed in suffocating anticipation. No one dared to say the worst out loud, yet everyone was thinking it. When a child has not come home, every worst-case scenario automatically forms in an adult's mind. While the entire household was spiraling in panic, every minute dragging on endlessly, somewhere else, Ni was laughing out loud. Mr. Huan had taken her to the children's play area at the end of the street. Bright lights glowed everywhere, cheerful music filled the air, and colorful balls rolled back and forth, an entirely different world from the tension suffocating the house. Mr. Huan slipped his phone into his pocket, didn't check his messages, didn't worry about work. For once, he left everything behind. Ni tugged at his hand, her eyes sparkling. "Grandpa, come play with me!" Mr. Huan bent down, smiled, and climbed into the ball pit with her. Soft balls rolled around them as Ni ran in circles, calling out, "Grandpa!" every time she slipped and then jumped back up, laughing brightly. Mr. Huan reached out to steady her, pretended to lose, and soon found himself laughing along. The sound felt unfamiliar yet comforting, as if it had been a long time since he had set aside his role and simply been a grandfather. When they got tired of playing, the two moved to the painting corner. Ni held the brush, tilting her head as she carefully chose colors, while Mr. Huan sat beside her, waiting patiently, offering gentle suggestions now and then. Then came the drawing table. She scribbled clumsy lines and explained very seriously that it was Grandpa's house and mine. Mr. Huan looked at the drawing, said nothing, only nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. After that, he bought Ni her favorite snacks. The two of them sat side by side. Ni ate happily, chatting as she chewed, as if this were the most wonderful afternoon. Mr. Huan listened, nodded, occasionally wiping her mouth, his gestures so natural that he didn't even realize he was doing them. Mr. Huan didn't take Ni out because of obligation. He did it because he was genuinely happy. In that moment, all the judgments that once existed seemed to dissolve. There was only a man smiling and a child filled with joy, far away from the fear, waiting somewhere else. Late afternoon settled in softly, almost without warning. The last light of day faded behind the rooftops, replaced by a quiet wash of orange spreading across the narrow road leading back from the play area. Ni stood on the steps, still holding the toy she had just been given, her eyes lingering inside, where the laughter from moments before seemed to still echo. "Next time, take me again, Grandpa!" She looked up and spoke quickly, as if afraid her words might not be heard in time. Mr. Hone bent down and looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, without hesitation. "Okay, whenever you want." The simple answer was enough to make Ly beam. She bounced in a small hop, then obediently followed him to the car, chatting non-stop as they walked, about the games she liked best, the colorful balls she had chosen, the statue she hadn't finished painting yet. Mr. Hone listened, answering with the occasional, "Mm-hmm," sometimes letting out a soft laugh. The afternoon passed so gently for him that he hardly noticed the sky growing dark. The car rolled onto the familiar road. Darkness thickened beyond the window. Streetlights flicked on, one by one, illuminating Ny's face as she leaned back in the rear seat, eyes sparkling, lips quietly humming a tune with no clear words. Mr. Hone glanced at her through the rearview mirror, then looked back to the road. In his mind, everything felt perfectly ordinary. A grandfather taking his granddaughter out for an afternoon, a small joy, nothing more. When the car stopped in front of the gate, Ly opened the door and jumped out first, turning back to wait for him. She took his hand and walked into the yard as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The lights inside the house came on. The door opened. Mr. Hone remained as calm as ever. He had no idea that on the other side of that door, everyone else had lived through a completely different afternoon. He didn't know about the unanswered calls, didn't know about the suffocating hours of waiting, didn't know how fear had crept into every corner of the house. To him, this was simply the end of a pleasant outing. To Ly, it was an unforgettable afternoon. But to those waiting inside, the moment that door opened was about to become something they would never forget. Outside, the air was still peaceful. Yet just a few steps more, that calm was about to collide head-on with emotions held in for hours, until everything finally broke loose. Overwhelmed with worry, Mrs. Hien could not wait any longer. As night fell, she trembled as she picked up her phone and called the police. Her voice caught as she explained that a child had left the house in the afternoon and still had not returned. Not long after, the police arrived. The house, already tense, grew even heavier. They sat down and asked carefully about every detail. What time Ly had left the house, what she was wearing, when Mrs. Hien had last seen her, whether anyone had come or gone during that time. James tried to answer as calmly as possible, while Diep stood beside him, her hands clenched tightly, her eyes fixed on the door. Just as the questions were still unfinished, the sound of the gate opening echoed from the yard. The door had just opened, and the light from inside spilled straight out into the yard. Ly stepped in first, still clutching her new toy, her face carrying all the excitement of a joyful afternoon. The moment Diep saw her, everything else seemed to fade away. She froze for the length of a single heartbeat, then rushed forward and pulled Ly tightly into her arms. Diep broke down crying. Without sound, only broken, choking sobs spilled out again and again, as if all the worry and fear that had built up over the past hours had finally found a way out. She held the little girl close, afraid that if she let go, Ly might disappear again. Ly looked confused, her hands awkwardly resting on Diep's shoulders. "Why are you crying?" she asked softly, her voice full of uncertainty. James stood frozen at the doorway. In the instant he saw Ly safe, all the strength seemed to drain from his body. He didn't move forward right away. He just stood there, taking a deep breath to keep himself from collapsing. The worst-case scenarios that had filled his mind only moments before suddenly dissolved, leaving behind a dizzying emptiness. Mrs. Huen was different. She was relieved enough to cry, yet angry enough to tremble. She stepped closer, wrapped Ly in a tight embrace, then turned to Mr. Huan, her voice unable to hide her reproach. Where did you go without telling anyone? Do you have any idea how worried we all were?" Mr. Juan stood still, not answering yet. James stepped forward, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder as if to calm her, then looked straight at his father. He tried to keep his voice steady but firm. "Wherever you go, you should at least say something. Ly is still little. If no one knows, how are we supposed to feel at ease?" The air in the house sank. The joy of Ly's safe return was still there, but it was covered by emotions that had yet to be named: relief, anger, gratitude, and questions that remained unanswered. Mr. Hone stood there, looking at the family for a few brief seconds. His gaze paused on Ly, still held tightly in Diep's arms, then moved to Mrs. Huen's pale face, worn thin by worry, and finally settled on James. But he didn't say much. "She wanted to go out and play, so I took her for a little while." His voice was low and even, not raised, not lowered. It wasn't the voice of someone defending himself, yet it carried none of the remorse everyone had been expecting. It was simply a very short, very plain explanation, as if what had just happened were nothing more than an ordinary afternoon outing. There was no apology, no question in return, and no further explanation. Mrs. Huen opened her mouth as if to say something, then stopped. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both anger and exhaustion, as if she didn't know whether to continue scolding him or remain silent to hold on to the fact that Ly was finally home safe. James stood still, hundreds of questions crowding his mind, but he didn't ask any of them. He realized that, right now, saying more wouldn't make anything clearer. Mr. Hone turned away and slowly walked toward the bathroom. The sound of the door closing behind him was soft, yet it left behind an uncomfortable emptiness in the room. Soon after, the steady sound of running water followed, cutting off the unfinished conversation of those who remained. In the living room, no one spoke. Diep continued to hold Ly, one hand resting on the girl's back as if to make sure she was truly there. Mrs. Huen sat down on the chair and let out a long, deep sigh. James looked down the hallway where his father had disappeared, feeling relief and heaviness intertwine. Mr. Hone did not realize, or perhaps did not want to realize, the extent of the fear everyone had endured. Yet it was also clear that he meant no harm. And it was precisely that in-between state, neither clearly right nor clearly wrong, that made the atmosphere in the house heavier than ever. Night settled in slowly, leaving behind a long stretch of silence inside the house. Ly had been taken to her bedroom. She was still chatting nonstop about the ball pit, about the games from the afternoon, as if the frightening events earlier had never existed. When the door closed, only the adults remained, carrying emotions they hadn't yet sorted through. In the bathroom, Mr. Hone stood beneath the warm stream of water, his heart lighter than before. He thought of Ly's laughter, of the way she had grabbed his hand and pulled him into the ball pit, of the excitement in her eyes when she asked to go out again next time. For the first time, he realized he had spent a long stretch of time with a child without thinking about blood ties at all. He had simply felt happy, a simple, unconditional kind of joy. The prejudices that once existed suddenly faded into the background. In the living room, Diep continued holding Ly for a long time, as if letting go might invite the fear back again. She was no longer panicked, but a quiet ache lingered inside her. The feeling of losing the child for hours still remained, like a mark that hadn't yet healed. Diep bent down and gently kissed Ly's hair, taking a deep breath to remind herself that the little girl was here, safe. James sat beside his mother. Neither of them spoke. The shock was still there, not because Ly had been taken out to play, but because the person who had taken her was Mr. Hone himself. The one who had once objected, once refused to accept, was now the one who had spent the entire afternoon playing with Ly, setting all work aside. Mrs. Hien let out a very soft sigh, while James looked toward the hallway where the bathroom light was still on. In that silence, something was changing. No one could name it yet, but everyone could feel it. And that seed of change, fragile as it still was, had begun with Mr. Hone himself. That night, the house gradually returned to quiet. Ly was fast asleep, her breathing steady as if the turbulent afternoon had been nothing more than a brief dream. But for the adults, things could not close so easily. The living room light remained on, illuminating thoughtful faces, each person carrying a different set of thoughts. Ly had returned safely, but from that day on, no one looked at this relationship the same way again. An afternoon that seemed perfectly ordinary had left behind an echo far too large. Mr. Hone's unexpected care, Diep's fear, James's and Mrs. Huyen's confusion, all of it was quietly reshaping the way they saw one another. Was this change in Mr. Hone merely fleeting, born from a short, joyful afternoon? Or was it the beginning of something else, something deeper, harder to define, and powerful enough to shake the prejudices that had existed for far too long?